Sure, that's fine.
Hi, I'm Kim Klett. I am the Deputy Executive Director for the Educators Institute for Human Rights, and I'm joining you here today from Gilbert, Arizona, which is a suburb of Phoenix. I'm in the Metro Phoenix area here.
And I'm Kate English. I'm the executive director for the Educators Institute for Human Rights. I'm sitting in Arlington, Virginia, near the Pentagon. Our offices are in Washington, D.C., across the river. And just so you know, both of us have spent a lot of time as middle school and high school. I've been 12 years as a middle school teacher, and Kim, you were a high school teacher for over 30 years. Is that right?
Yes,
And so
yes.
as I said to Maya in the email, I'm very excited about talking with you all today because it's been a long time since I've been able to talk with students, even on a recording.
Exactly. So, we're going to tell you a little bit about our organization and then get into the topic for today. So, Kate is going to share the PowerPoint with you, and we're going to kind of walk through this as a conversation. So, hopefully, that'll make it a little more interesting for you. So,
And we
again, we're the Educators Institute for Human Rights. And, Kate, do you want to tell them our mission statement?
Yes, and I'm going to do a little bit of reading here, so pardon me if I sound like I'm reading. The Educators Institute for Human Rights is an organization that really focuses on teacher to teacher collaboration. So that's really at the heart of what we do is bringing teachers together, not big NGOs or governments, but people who are in classrooms every day working with students like you. Taking lessons from the Holocaust and from other historic human rights violations, we develop teaching materials, we hold trainings and summits and workshops, and we support educator networks globally so the teachers around the world working with their students can develop a deeper understanding, the teachers and the students, of how horrible conflicts arise and how they evolve. How is justice served in the wake of these sorts of things? And most importantly, what can we do? How can we be part of preventing future atrocities?
Great. And so we would like to talk to you about where we're doing our current projects. We actually started in Rwanda in 2011 and are continuing to work there. We also do work here in the United States, Bosnia and Herzegovina, Cambodia, Democratic Republic of the Congo. That's a mouthful, and Argentina. And then we also do work not on the ground, but we do work in Colombia, Northern Ireland, Ukraine, and Lebanon. So we are all over the place, really.
And we thought it'd be fun to share a couple of photos of some of the work that we've done in the past. Since we've been doing it since 2011, there's a lot of photos. We just picked four that might be representative. The first photo in the upper left corner that you can see is of one of our staff members, Kelly Watson from Indianapolis, Indiana. And she is in Cambodia in 2016. She's returning there in just a few months to work with teachers with our partner, the Documentation Center of Cambodia that's located in Phnom Penh.
And right next to that in the upper right is a program we did in May of 2018 in Bosnia and Herzegovina. That was actually in Sarajevo. We worked with a really unique group there. We had a group of 40 people, 20 were teachers, and 20 were those teachers' students. And it was really fun and interesting and thought provoking. It really led to some great conversations. You can see on the wall where the screen is there that we were using the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum's exhibit called Summer Neighbors. So again, using the Holocaust as a basis of our program for that day.
And in the lower left corner, you can see a few of the teachers that participated in a hybrid workshop that we held in December of 2021 in the Democratic Republic of the Congo. And this was it was a surprising event for us. We thought it was going to be 20 people, that we would do a pilot project with our partner organization, which is it's a development organization called PADS. And we thought 20 people. And then 2 weeks before the event, our partner there said, do you want to know how many folks have registered? And it was over 350. The conflict that's in the Democratic Republic of Congo is ongoing and very violent in some parts of the country. The main part of the event was held in Kinshasa. So in a kind of a typical, much like the room you see there in Bosnia, it was a kind of a typical classroom presentation space. But in 6 other places around the whole country, which is quite large, in 6 other villages, there were members of the PADS staff that went out on bicycles and brought laptops to people's living rooms and porches, and in one case to a classroom, so that teachers could come together and sit around a laptop and join us for this training. And this was during COVID. So, ideally they're working in a COVID bubble. I mean, we all can remember wanting to be able to do that. But in this picture, you can see they have 2 laptops. They're watching a presentation. And in that case, I don't know if you can tell, but it's a historical photograph of the Hall of Mirrors at Versailles. We were discussing, warning signs and historic events that create context around different events. And in this case, of course, the Holocaust.
And then in the bottom right is our most recent program. We started a program called the Rwandan Teacher Corps. We'd been working with teachers in Rwanda for many years, like I said, since 2011. And this was something that they asked for, that they wanted to do. And so we took 15 teachers for this special program last March in 2023. Here they are pictured with one of our board members, Alexandra Zapruder, who wrote, you can see they're holding a book called Salvaged Pages. It's an incredible book of diaries by young people during the Holocaust. And we highly recommend it. But they were able to Zoom with her. We had a full 4-day program with these teachers. And then they each came up with a capstone project that they wanted to work on for the next year. They went back to their classrooms, worked on these projects, and came back. Kate and I were just there earlier this month to wrap that program up and see what they had to tell us about their projects. And it was really exciting to see some of the great things that they had done in their schools, in their communities, with their students and colleagues. Just a really great program. So this is just a sample of some of the work we do.
So the reason we were asked to join you today was to talk about how we define atrocities. What does it mean? What does a genocide mean? What does an atrocity mean? We're seeing a lot of issues at the forefront of the news right now in almost every continent. In fact, I think, I don't know that there's anything specifically happening in North America at the moment, although we certainly see warning signs. We want to put this all into some context for you and think about historically, what is a genocide? What is an atrocity? And what's the difference and why does it matter? So we're going to start with, I'm not going to read the whole slide to you. I'm going to bet that at this point in time, you can read that for yourself. But Secretary of State Hillary Clinton in 2012 was giving a speech at a symposium at the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum. And she was making the point that the genocides and mass atrocities don't just happen out of the blue, that there is a context for them. There are warning signs. But this particular analogy is used pretty widely in the world of genocide prevention. And that's the idea that you can have a stack of dry wood. You can have dry leaves sitting at it in the middle of the woods. You can have a pile of logs ready to go. You can have matches, and you can have lighter fluid, and all of those things can be present, but until you actually light a match and put it to the firewood, you haven't started a fire. And in the same way, we want to intervene before, in an atrocity, we want to intervene before those things come together to make a conflagration, because those are the points where we can intervene the most effectively, is before it gets to the full blaze.
And so we have some examples of warning signs. These are things that, we can look for before these atrocities or genocides happen. And so, we could go back to the Holocaust and look at some of the propaganda that scapegoated, that blamed Jewish people for all kinds of things that were, of course, not true, using images like you see here, negative images of Jewish people and other groups as well. So that's one example. On the right top, you see the example of past group violence. So if you have things like this is Maidan Square, which is in Kiev, Ukraine, and you might have heard about Ukraine in the news the last couple of years, since Russia invaded Ukraine. And, this is still ongoing. It's in the daily news. But if you look at the date here, this was back in 2014. You can see examples of past violence, against a place, against a people, that builds up. So if you want to think back to the Holocaust again, for example, there were many pogroms, these acts of mass violence that took place before the events of Kristallnacht in November 9th and 10th of 1938. And so, it's like a buildup to something bigger. So these examples from the past of violence taking place, again, can build up, and that could be a warning sign if we see those being repeated. We also see preparations. In the bottom left corner, this is a picture from Rwanda. They're amassing machetes. Machetes were the most commonly used weapon in that genocide, against the Tutsis in 1994. And, that's just one method of preparation. It could be preparing the military and training. It could be stockpiling weapons. It could be, food stores for certain groups of people. It could be all different kinds of things, but you're getting ready for something bigger to happen. And then the last example in the bottom right, this picture is actually from Bosnia. It's a very famous picture, armed conflict. So this is, if you think of, for example, like with World War II, right? You've got a war going on, and yet underneath that, you have the Holocaust happening, right? So people aren't necessarily paying attention to that because World War II is big and it's affecting a lot of people from a lot of different places. Same thing here. You've got these smaller examples of armed conflict that are taking place under the siege of Sarajevo, under the war, and conflict. And so again, people maybe aren't paying as much attention to those, and so they can kind of slip through the cracks.
Scholar named James Waller. He's a professor at the University of Connecticut and was a former professor in Vermont, just recently moved to Connecticut. He wrote a book called Confronting Evil, and you can see it down in the lower left-hand corner there. He came up with this theory of a continuum of prevention strategies. So if we think of it like a river, you think of things that are, if we even think of it in terms of the climate or pollution, if what's upstream that we could stop to keep the water clean down below, what's in the middle that we could stop that could keep the water for the next clean for the next round. So we can apply that same analogy to atrocity prevention. So if you're upstream, meaning it's those warning signs that we're seeing, you see risk factors places where we could intervene and make change before something horrible happens. So you can be looking at things that are happening with the government. We can look at the history of conflict within a particular setting. Look at the economic conditions. Is there a lot of poverty, or is there a great disparity? Is there a lot of difference between the very, very wealthy and the very, very poor? And then one that I think we all can, as I'd alluded to earlier, I think causes all of us concern right now here in the United States, and that is this idea of social fragmentation. There's so much division where it's difficult for people to find the space in between where they can agree on things and work together to find solutions. And of course, we're hoping that we see that happening. This is a place, an early stage where you can intervene in some kind of a conflict. But that is an indicator that you're seeing a split, a divide between different social groups. When we get to midstream, we're looking for those places where you could intervene and respond in that moment. And those are going to be at large scale. It's not going to be individual actions so much as it's going to be whole governments and political bodies, including the UN or national government. It can be economic. You can and economic and legal. So you could do things like put in economic sanctions to end a conflict, create legal restrictions that would also contribute to trying to stop whatever's happening. And of course, as a last resort, whether or not we'll talk about this more in a moment, but whether or not we call it a genocide, you have to make a decision about whether or not it's appropriate to have a military intervention. Do you bring in troops, either a UN task force or a UN coalition force, or a national one that intervenes and puts boots on the ground to stop the conflict? Once things have settled down in the downstream portion of this continuum, we also want to think about ending things in a way that does not circle back and start things all over again. So we want to look for opportunities to hold perpetrators of these atrocities accountable through a system of justice, through laws, and through a whole legal system that, again, might be a national legal system. It might be at the International Criminal Court. It might be at a tribunal that's outside of a country. But as we saw in Rwanda before the International Criminal Court was formed in 1998, they held, for Rwanda and Bosnia, they held their justice process in satellite locations. So in Rwanda, they were held in Arusha, Tanzania. And for Bosnia, they actually were held in The Hague, but in a separate building from what then became the International Criminal Court. This will want to make sure that the truth is coming out, that information is accurate and responsible, that we're not spreading misinformation, disinformation, or malinformation to perpetrate the idea of that division that we saw, that we were so concerned about upstream. We're not repeating that after the event to make things worse or to cycle back. And one of the most important things is that we have an accurate memory of what has happened, that we take the time to memorialize, again, accurately, that we don't engage in denial or distortion of the events. And somehow this didn't happen, or it didn't happen the way that you say that it happened, or somehow minimize the suffering of the people who were the victims of the atrocity. So those three things really are important, not only in the terms that you would think of, obviously, but because if we do those things right, then we break the cycle and we stop the continuum from moving forward.
Exactly. And so this is a tool that was created by the Simon Scott Center, that is a part of the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum. It's called the Early Warning Project. And this is something that was created to share with government agencies, with the military, with international human rights organizations, but they also publish it for us, for, anybody can get access to this. It's published both on their website and also in book form. And so what they do is they look at areas, this one's from 2021 to 22, and they look at, okay, where are we seeing those warning signs? Where are we seeing areas that are kind of flaring up with some of those signs? What do we want to keep an eye on? And you can see from the key that the red areas are going to be where it's the highest. And so, we've got the Democratic Republic of Congo that we mentioned before, where we're doing some work. And then up in Asia, you've got India and Pakistan, and then you've got Iraq. So it's, those are some of the highest areas in 2021 and 22 that they were looking at. And they can kind of keep an eye on things. People can pay attention. People can think of ways that maybe they could, get involved, things like that. And then also, I just wanted to point out, because you can see with the DRC, it's such a large country. And, we mentioned that we do some work there, but right next to it, there's a little tiny yellow, which means it's the lowest area of concern here. That is Rwanda, where we also do work. And so, again, for a variety of reasons, yes, they had the genocide in 1994, but right now it's a pretty safe and we're not seeing the warning signs that we're seeing in these other places. You can see in those orange, those are going to be areas that things are stirring up and you might want to keep an eye on. They're not the red, but they're getting there. And so keeping an eye on those as well. So it's a really good tool again, and you'll have access to this with the PowerPoint and can click on those and it will take you to their website and you can follow that.
So there are a lot of terms flying around. I'm sure you've heard most of these before. If not, we're going to make them clear for you. That we use to describe different kinds of mass atrocity events. So, and there I just use one of them. So some of them have legal definitions and some do not, but they are often used to describe the things that are happening. They just don't have a legal definition. So we're going to start with the broadest term, and that is the one that I just mentioned. It's mass atrocities. And again, if you all throughout this PowerPoint, we're going to share. It's a Google, not a PowerPoint. It's a Google slide presentation. And all of these things are linked. So if you wanted to find these definitions from a good source, from an original source, you can just click on these and they'll link right to those definitions. So mass atrocities is one of them that is not a legal term. It's a generic kind of a term that's applied to all of these things, an umbrella term, so that we're not mixing things up. We're saying in general, we would call this an atrocity or a mass atrocity. It again doesn't have a legal standing in a court of law, but it gets to the point and describes pretty well what we think is happening in a situation. Ethnic cleansing is another term that actually does not have a legal definition, but we use it a lot to describe situations where a particular ethnic or racial group might be targeted to be removed from an area. And when I say removed, it could be that that's by acts of violence or injury or even killing, but it also could be forcibly making people leave their homes. Which of course is awful, but it's a different circumstance. In any case, those things could be considered, in either case, are considered ethnic cleansing. Again, not a legal term. The other three are terms that are covered by something called the Rome Statute of 1998, and I think I mentioned that earlier. It's a statute that, well, genocide was long before that as a defined term, but the three of them were involved in thinking about them in a fresh way in 1998 with this Rome Statute of the United Nations. It also established the International Criminal Court that I mentioned earlier. So we know war crimes have been defined, going back centuries. We know that genocide is a term that we've known as a legal definition since 1948, when the convention was ratified at the United Nations. And crimes against humanity also has a long history in the legal vernacular. But they all do have very different definitions and applications. And in the broadest sense, when we talk about war crimes, we're talking about those crimes that are committed by combatants, by armed soldiers, if you will, combatants, against non-combatants. So why do we use the term combatant and non-combatant? Well, that's because a combatant could be a person who's part of a state-sponsored military, but it also could be someone who's part of a militia or a rebel group. But they're armed and they are committing crimes against people who are unarmed or not part of a combat situation. And those unarmed people could include the most obvious, and that would be civilians. It also could include people who are in hospitals or medical personnel. And it also includes POWs. So when we say combatants against non-combatants, war crimes can be committed under any of those circumstances. And when you get to college and you're studying this in more depth, I'm sure you'll spend time really looking at that definition in full. It is pages and pages and pages of clearly defined instances that would constitute war crimes. But in the general sense, it's violence committed by combatants against non-combatants. The term genocide was founded by a man named Raphael Lemkin, who was a Polish Jew who had left Europe just before the Holocaust. And he was dismayed by the events that had happened in Armenia, and which we now refer to as a genocide, but the term didn't exist before 1948 officially. So he wanted a word. He thought we need a word to define this horrible thing that has happened. In Armenia, and then as it was happening in Europe during World War II in the form of the Holocaust. And what he came to the definition that he arrived at was to define it as a crime that's committed with the intent to destroy a group. And this link, once again, will take you directly to that UN definition. I'm not going to open it because it'll mess up the Zoom slides and things. So we don't want to go there, but open it up for yourself. You can read it in great detail. It is, again, the intent to destroy the group. And that could be through a number of methods. So it might be that that's mass killing. And that's the one that we most frequently think of. It doesn't have to be a mass killing, though. It could, I mean, how do we define mass? You can get into a whole discussion about how many people equals a mass killing, and people do get into that discussion. But the more important thing is that intent to destroy. You could have it in a geographic area. So, for example, Bosnian Muslims, right, in a specific area. It started with ethnic cleansing, and eventually in Srebrenica, we see a genocide because they are gathered in a specific location, and the intention is to destroy that group within that space. Their intention may be later to get all of the Bosnian Muslims out of all of Bosnia and out of all of the Balkans, but at that time in Srebrenica, the intent was to destroy the group in that region. So you can see where it's different. You could be talking about all of the group or part of the group, in whole or in part. It could be that another way that genocide could be recognized is that the intent to destroy the group is done by the removal of children. So we see that in two cases where we could be calling it a genocide. And two examples that I can think of right away are in Australia, with the Aboriginal peoples, and the attempts to take those children from their homes and put them into British schools and make them more white, if you will. And the same can be said of Native American boarding schools, both here and in Canada, here in the US and in Canada, where young Native children were removed from their families and taken to boarding schools with the intention of removing their heritage by destroying their identity as a Native person. And so that is also considered a form of genocide. Another is to force people not to be able to give birth, to prevent births in a group, so that you can't perpetuate your group. And finally, it could be through a form of active neglect, if you will. So we see that a lot in the situation that happened in Darfur in the early 2000s, where the conditions are created where no one could survive. You kill all the cattle, you poison the wells, and no one can live in that place anymore. So the intent is to destroy the group by destroying any possibility of them being able to live in the place where they were. So those are all forms of genocide. And again, I'll say it one more time, the key piece is that these things are done with an intention to destroy the group. So what are crimes against humanity then? Well, they pick up on the other half of that. If you remove this idea of an intent to destroy the group, then most of what you would be looking at in these terms of mass killings or many of the forms of atrocity that we were just discussing could constitute a crime against humanity. So in both cases, these things are sponsored by some kind of a state or organization, generally state-sponsored, generally a government-sponsored, and highly organized, systematic in their nature. There's knowledge of them before they're going to take place. That's important. This is not just a spontaneous outbreak of violence. There's knowledge of it. There's planning of it. And in the case of crimes against humanity, the best analogy I can make is if you have seen any of the Avatar movies, particularly the first one, because the intent, you might have a mass killing, but the intent was never to destroy the group. And in Avatar, it's a good example because if you've seen it and if you remember, there's the unobtainium underneath the mother tree, right? And the Na'vi people protect that. It is part of their identity and who they are. And this military force comes in, and what they want is the unobtainium under the tree. They don't come there to destroy the Na'vi people. They come there to get the unobtainium, and they don't care who's in the way when they do it. So if they have to wipe out a whole lot of the Na'vi in order to get the unobtainium, then that's what they're going to do. And so in that case, there isn't an intent to destroy the group. The intent is to get the mineral that they want, or the resource that they're going after. And so we wouldn't call that a genocide. We would consider that a crime against humanity. Another example in the other direction of a crime against humanity that's a systematic atrocity inflicted on a people is the enslavement of people. And the biggest thing there is that, yes, you're committing these horrible, atrocious crimes by enslaving other human beings. It's not done with the intent to destroy the group, however. In fact, in most cases, the intention is to propagate the group, is to make the group larger, whether you're profiting from the sales of another human being or you're enlarging your own workforce wherever you are. And so in that case also, that's considered a crime against humanity and not a genocide. Now, all of these things, what the Rome Statute in 1998 did was really look at how to make these three things, war crimes, crimes against humanity, and genocide, have equal weight in a court of justice. So that if you're going into a court of law and you're trying to prosecute someone for an atrocity, all of them should have the same sentencing weight, ideally. So I could bring someone in for crimes against humanity. And for example, in Bosnia, we could talk about people who were committing the siege on Sarajevo, depriving people of food and bombing their homes and so on and so forth. But the intent might be to take the city rather than to destroy a group. Or it might be hard to prove that it's to destroy the group. And in that case, the person who is accused of the crime against humanity can get the same sentence as a person who is accused of a genocide. So the intention is to make them equal so that we're not constantly saying that something is a genocide because we think somehow someone's going to get a punishment that we think is more appropriate to the horrible level, the horrible nature of the crime that's been committed. And so in that case, if you think even in terms of an interpersonal crime, if you have a murder, there's an intent to commit murder, right? And that's very similar to the difference between a crime against humanity and a genocide. And manslaughter, you didn't intend to kill someone, but they're still dead and you are still responsible for it. And so with the International Criminal Court, if you were going to prosecute someone and you have to make a decision about, do I charge them with genocide or do I charge them with a crime against humanity? Well, the level of proof, the burden of proof for a genocide is much higher. You have to prove that intent to destroy the group. And so the part of the purpose was that the punishment should be very similar, because just because you can't prove that there was an intent doesn't mean that it wasn't a horrific atrocity, and that the time that someone is put in prison for example, should not be different between those two things. They all do get mixed up, and they all can be happening at the same time. So again, using Bosnia as an example, you can have crimes against humanity happening in Sarajevo, where the army put the city under siege, at the same time that you have a genocide happening in Srebrenica. And that can be all under that umbrella of war that Kim was speaking about earlier. So when we get to that court of law, it gets very specific about which thing you're charging. And people can be charged with more than one thing for even in the same circumstance, just depending on the particulars of, in this situation, it was done for this reason and so on. And so I think you can see where we're going with that, but you can have them all happening in the same conflict. It just depends on how they're going to be charged and what proof you have to demonstrate that any one of these things has actually taken place. So why do definitions matter? Well, you've heard a little bit of it there, that it matters if you're charging someone, you have to make a decision about how you're going to charge them. But in general, why do we if we can mix them up, if if they can happen in the same region, then why does it matter how we define them? If we're going to charge them the same way, why does it matter? Well, it matters because there are different ways that we could be responding. And under these different circumstances, what we do and how we respond and where we intervene is very different depending on what term we know applies. But when we're talking about aid, making sure that people get what they need to survive, shelter, food, medical care, and so forth, we don't really care which term we're using. I mean, you're not concerned so much about whether or not a genocide or a mass atrocity or a crime against humanity or a war crime has taken place. You want the people to get the help that they need to get the medical care and the shelter and the food that will make them at least a little bit whole again. If we're speaking up on behalf of people to get them that aid, to make change in the other three things that we're looking at here, when we are advocating, it's also less important that we are specific, although if what you're advocating for is one of these specific things, you want to be clear on how you're using the term. But basically, if you're speaking up to get people aid, if you're saying we need to get humanitarian relief supplies to a specific group of people, we're not saying, we don't have to say that it's because there's been a genocide or because there's been a crime against humanity. It's simply that it's because the people need it. Now, if we're talking about policy, justice, or armed intervention, then it really does matter. It really does matter. Just one moment. What definition you're using. If you're creating laws, then you do need to know what you're making the laws about. If you are holding someone accountable in a court of law, as I just described, then it's really important that you are clear what the charges are and how you're using the terms. And finally, if you're going to put boots on the ground, and in the photograph down here, you can see this is actually the military situation in Srebrenica, and you can see it on the right, it's the before, and on the left, it's the after, looking where the people are moving and how they're being forced into smaller areas and what's happening to them afterwards. Then you really do want to be clear also what definitions you're using and how you're, what actions you're taking as a result of those terms. There are some ways that over the years that the students that I've worked with, they don't necessarily see themselves in the ways that they could be responding to atrocities. It's not everybody is not seeing themselves as an aid worker, if you will, or someone who could, I don't know, gather supplies to put together health kits to get to people in refugee camps or something like that. That may not be where their skill set would best be put to use, and perhaps that's you. But there are lots of ways to take whatever talents we have and apply them in ways that could help people who are experiencing atrocities. And here are three very good examples. So here on the lower right-hand corner here, we see an image of solar cookers, which, seems like it'd be nice on a camping trip, but it's also very important if you're living in a refugee camp in Sudan in 2003. The women in the camps were sent out to get firewood, to have clean water, and to cook food every day. That put them at great risk for assault and other horrible things. The men didn't go because they were at risk directly to be killed, just outright killed. But the women were at risk for all kinds of horrible assault. And so rather than go out for wood every day, these two engineering students at a university came up with the idea of creating a solar cooker that you could get lightweight, that you could get into camps for refugees, and that they could use those instead of having to go out and find firewood every day. And so you can see that, for an engineer to solve a problem, a creative problem-solving task such as that is critically important and makes a huge difference in the lives of people who are experiencing atrocities. Up at the top, we see an app that was developed by a group of lawyers and law enforcement folks that allows people who are in the midst of violence to record it, but not just to record it on their phones, because I'm sure that you can recognize that with AI and all the different ways that we can manipulate and edit video, we couldn't necessarily count on that to be accurate in a court of law. So this app is meant to capture what happens in a way that maintains the safety of the person who's trying to gather the information. So for example, if someone grabbed the phone, it would shut down automatically. And it would send off the video and something else would come up on the screen. That's part of the way that this was designed. But the video itself is also sent immediately into a vault, so that you have the chain of evidence is intact. It doesn't go to YouTube and then somebody edits it and turns it into something else. It doesn't, nobody puts it up on TikTok or something like that. It is sent directly to a vault that keeps the integrity of the original content so that it is usable in a court of law. And then the last one is one that for me, I never would have thought of this, just be perfectly clear. This is one that's based on finance. So if you're a business person, or if you're thinking about becoming a business person, you know, how might you be a part of a solution? And in this case, they're looking at the banking information. It's forensic finance. So it's going back and looking at the records and figuring out where the folks who are committing atrocities, where is their money coming from? How is it getting to them? How are they using it? And so you can follow the trail of the money, follow the money, and in that way cut off the sources of funding or find ways to indict and charge the people who are committing the crimes by using their financial records. So this is Omar Ishmael, and he is from Darfur, and he gave this testimony as part of an exhibit at the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum called From Memory to Action. That exhibit isn't around anymore, but these videos, this one of Omar and many other witnesses to atrocities, do exist on their website. So give me just a minute, and I'm going to set this video up. It's very short, but he has something very vital to say about all of this that we've just been discussing so far. And I want to, here, full screen.
When the issue of genocide came to existence and people are debating it and sometimes wrangling on it, over it, I would say, look, guys, I'm a Darfurian. There is a real issue here. Please don't reduce the suffering of my people to a mere issue of semantics. If you believe it is genocide, I urge everybody to act as if it's genocide and do what people do when they are faced with genocide. If you believe it is a crime against humanity, act as if it's a crime against humanity. If you believe it is just a civil war, like some people would like to describe it, act as if it's a, if somebody believes it's a street fight, call 911 and have the police deal with it. But don't stand on the sidelines arguing whether this is genocide or not genocide and what we then do. You have to act within your belief today and now.
And
the deadline for signing was twice extended.
that is a different video on Sudan. As you can see, there's a collection. And go back to, there we are. Okay. So the main takeaway for you is we'd love you to keep in touch, but it's that you don't need to wait for the definition to be given for you to care about the people on the ground, to speak on their behalf, to work to get aid to them. If you become a lawyer, if you become a politician, if you become part of the military, if you become a journalist, then we need to be very clear about what we're talking about. But as a regular citizen, if you want to be of help and use, you don't need to wait or use the terms in a way that might undermine the help that might be given to people who are suffering. Rather than get caught up in the language, let's get caught up in the solution and getting help to the people who need help. Kim.
Thank you. So we hope that you've found this information really informative. We do want to keep in touch with you. You can reach out to us on our website, eihr.org. You can send questions there if you happen to, have a question about something from today. But you can also check out our many resources. If you think your teachers would be interested in this, share it with them as well. We also have a kind of an arm of our group called the Right to Learn Coalition. They do a lot of work with, what you've seen lately with censorship and book bannings and fighting against those kinds of things. So that's a really interesting group. We'd love if you checked out our YouTube channel. Kate mentioned the boarding schools earlier. Just one of our many webinars that we have archived there is talking with the survivor who was in one of those boarding schools. And she does an excellent job. She speaks to students often and did a webinar for us. And we have many, many topics in that archive of webinars. So you can check that out. And then we're also on social media. So you can find us and follow our posts and see what's going on in this world through that. So we thank you very much for being with us today and for joining us, and hope that you've learned a lot. Kate, do you have any final words?
Yes, I just want to say thank you for patience with things like, puppies being impatient in the background and so forth, as we all know happens on Zoom. But most importantly, thank you for being interested, and thank you for coming and being part of this program and being part of the solution. We look forward to seeing you and seeing your efforts as you work to bring some kind of help and aid and advocacy to people who may be experiencing the effects of an atrocity. So thanks very much.
Thank you.